In this video, we are going to examine how to use conditional formatting and also custom colors in Excel. In order to examine these things, we are going to use our loan amortization schedule. And the first thing I'm going to do is copy the worksheet. So I'm going to right-click on the name of the worksheet. I'm going to select Move or Copy. I'm going to make sure that I create a copy by selecting this box. And I want to move it to the end. Then I'll hit OK. And now we've made a copy. And I'm going to rename this worksheet. So now I'm going to right-click on it, rename, and I'm going to name it Conditional Formatting. And once I have the name typed in, I can hit Enter, and that name will be saved. So the first thing we want to do is realize that if we wanted to use some conditional formatting, we have to select the certain cells. And in this case, what I'm trying to do is create a conditional format for our amortization schedule that is dependent on the term and the payment frequency. In other words, depending on what month we are in, if it's a month beyond our payment schedule, I want to use a different color in this table. In this case, because we have a 30-year term and a payment frequency of 12 years, because our amortization schedule is 360 months, all of the payments that are in the amortization schedule will show up and they will be correct. However, if we want to change the term to 15 years, we'll notice that the value that we get later on in the amortization schedule will show up as an error. And the reason for that is that after the end of our term, the end of our 15 years of monthly payments, in other words, at the end of our 180th payment, we will have paid off the loan. And so we're getting an error message for the remainder of the table. And in this case, we want to use conditional formatting to change the color of the font that's going to be in this amortization schedule. So the next thing I'm going to do is go back to the beginning of this table. I'm going to hold down Control and hit the left arrow, and then I'm going to hold down Control and hit the up arrow. And you'll see that I'm back at the beginning of the amortization schedule. And so what we need to do now is we need to highlight every value that's in this amortization schedule. In order to do that, I'm going to hold down Control and Shift and hit the down arrow. And then I'm going to hold down Control and Shift and hit the right arrow. And we'll see that we've highlighted all of the data in the table. And just so we can see what we're doing, I'm going to scroll back up so you can see the inputs associated with this table. And what we're going to do now is conditionally format the values within this table. So I'm going to select Alt, H for the Home tab, L for conditional formatting, and I want to create a new role, so I'm going to select In. And what we see is our pop-up box will appear. And what I want to do is use a formula to determine which cells to format. So I'm going to go to this option, where I'm going to use a formula. You'll also notice that some of the letters in this pop-up box are underlined. And if I wanted to skip to that particular option, I could hold down Alt and, for example, hit the letter O, and I would go to Format Values. And now what I want to do is create a formula that's going to condition these cells. And anytime we start making a formula, we have to start with an equal sign. And what we need to do is use the month or the time period in our first column, or column A, combined with our term and our payment frequency. What we're trying to do is say that for every month that is beyond our term, every month that is beyond payment 180, I want to conditionally format it as a certain color. And so what I'm going to do is say that for cell A12, because that's the first row and the first column that's associated with our amortization schedule. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that for that entire row of 12 that we're always referencing that first column. So for example, if I were to use or apply this conditional formatting to this entire schedule, as I moved from left to right, if I wanted to conditionally format this value and I did not anchor the first column, what would happen is it would base it on this value here. And so what I need to do in this formula is hit F4 or put a $sign in front of that letter A. And that way we're always referencing column A. The next thing that we want to do is make sure that we're dealing with the correct values. And what I want to happen in this amortization schedule is that if the month is greater than our years times our payment frequency, that it conditionally formats it as gray font. So in this case, I'm going to use a greater than symbol, because if that month is greater than our term or number of years, and we can find that in cell B6. And again, I can hit F4. And no matter where I'm at in the table, I want it to refer to cell B6. So I'm going to use cell anchoring with a $sign in front of both the column letter and the row number, times our payment frequency, which is in cell B8. And again, I'm going to hit F4 to always refer to that. And then what I want to do is I want to format those cells. So I'm going to select Format. And again, I could hold down Alt and hit the F to get there. We'll notice the underlined F. And I want to change the font color. So that's the tab that I'm on. And I want to go to Color, More Colors, Custom. And then here I can use different codes in order to determine a certain color. And if I wanted to use different models, I could. In this case, I'm going to use RGB for red, green, and blue. And now we need to find what code to use for those colors. In this case, I'm going to go to the Mississippi State website in order to find that code. And here we're at the Mississippi State University Office of Public Affairs website, opa.msstate.edu. And we're going to go to the tab for Brand and Identity. And that's where we can find our color codes. So we'll click on Brand and Identity. And if we scroll down here, we will see a number of different things that we can choose from. One of those things is the color palette. And that's going to give us our colors that are official colors by Mississippi State University. Here we see a list of those colors. There's also a downloadable PDF. And at the top, we see our primary maroon color and then our support colors. And we're going to use this Mississippi State light gray. And you see the different color codes that we may use. If you wanted to use HTML coding, you might use that hex number. In this case, we're going to use the RGB, where we find that the color code is 193, 198, and 200. So again, we're going to use RGB, 193, 198, and 200 in order to conditionally format our color as Mississippi State light gray. Now that I have that code, I can type those values in here. Our red is going to be 193. You'll notice that in the bottom right, it updates with a new color. Our green is going to be 198. Again, updating the color. And our blue is going to be 200. And what we see is that light gray. I will select OK, then OK again. And while we're here, there's two things that I want to remind you of. The first is to make sure you use an equal sign, and then you also anchor those cells. So we're going to hit OK here. You'll notice that some of these cells, the font is this color gray. If we go up to cell 180, we notice that this is the last month of our amortization schedule. 15 times 12 is 180, and our loan is paid off at that point. So we want to use our conditional formatting to make sure that all of these other cells are in this light gray. If we want to go back and look at the difference between this and a 30-year term, we can. If I change this to 30, what should happen is, because all of these months should be in the amortization schedule, none of those cells should be gray. And we'll note that that's the case. So again, conditional formatting will allow us to create different formats based on certain values. We can use a formula to determine which cells we want conditionally formatted, and that allows us to customize the look or highlight certain things in Excel.